right, we're gonna let a few people load in here. Share with followers. And share this out too, so people know there's a few people listening online. See if we can get your link in here. There we go. And I'll do a little sharing into the World Wide Web, and then we'll get started. You guys are listening to my husband's original music. Right, we're going to go ahead and get started, and we'll let people flow in as they flow in. So you are in the Laughter After Trauma show. My name is Deanna. I am a speaker, educator, and coach that brings light and lightness to the heavy topic of trauma. My journey with intimate partner violence led me to find the beauty and the laughter in healing. I believe we are all magic, and we all have what we need inside of us to self-heal. And so what I like to do here is bring together people who have experienced their own levels of trauma, showing you that you're not alone, and that if we can, you can. And I'm hoping that this will raise awareness, create connection, bring hope, and, create a community where we can all share the laughter after. So with no further ado, I'm going to invite Ingrid. My guest today is Dr. Ingrid Clayton. I'm going to invite her up to video. And you guys, I have not met her other than Instagram. And I became an Instagram fan. And I don't know if you would call me a stalker, but maybe. But anyway, so that is kind of how I started following you actually on Instagram. And I want you to just tell us a little bit before we kind of get into that part of the story, just a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? Where are you now? That kind of thing. We know you're a doctor.
Yes, well, thank you for having me here. I'm happy to be here. I am kind of cozy in my blankie. I have my son's cold, and so I have my tissues here to help with my sniffles. But
The same way, but I just
yeah, I've been sipping my tea all day. But I'm in Los Angeles right now. I'm actually in my office in Los Angeles. But originally, I'm from Colorado, and I lived kind of all over the map between there and here on the East Coast, and then in Holland, and then made my way to LA in 1999, a place I never thought I would live. It's the place I've stayed the longest. And I'm a clinical psychologist here. I have a private practice. And yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't get to mention this in the full introduction, but not only are you a clinical psychologist, but you are an author who wrote a memoir called Believing Me. The title's a lot longer than that. I know. Something about
That's the main
narcissism and
title.
complex trauma. but But believing me, I think that is the biggest part. So I think that that's something that we should all talk about. So it says healing from narcissistic abuse and complex trauma. I do have notes. Um, also, also, some articles that you've published in various different places, and one of which is considered essential reading called What is Self Gaslighting, which you also talked about in the book too. And I think that a lot of people know what gaslighting is, but they might not realize that they do it to themselves. So that's something else we can talk about. But I know that after you wrote the book, that it kind of led you into starting your Instagram page. And that was going to
Yeah.
kind of be our jumping off point. And well, first, let me just let everybody know. So, in this little fortune cookie that you see below us that's scrolling across, Dr. Ingrid shares a trauma toolbox. And I've downloaded this. It's a little PDF and it's got a bunch of just tips and tools that you can use for yourself to just maybe help, right? In overcoming your trauma. So, just to let you guys know what that's about. So tell me about your Instagram, because I know that that's kind of part of the story of when you wrote your book and kind of the place you went to promote. So tell me about
Yeah.
that.
Well, so I'll just backtrack it just a hair that
Huh?
I wrote another book all the way in 2011. It was published, so I was writing it even well before then. And
Okay.
that one's called Recovering Spirituality. And I never thought I would write another book. That one was based on my dissertation research. It just kind of a straight ahead nonfiction book. And then 5 years ago, almost to the day actually, because I think it was around Halloween 5 years ago, this writing started coming for me, and I couldn't stop. And it was stories largely from my childhood, some when I was an adult. I wasn't sure how they hung together. I'm like, what is this thing? But I was called and compelled to do this writing, what eventually became this memoir. But I didn't know what it was for many years. Even though I'm a psychologist and a trauma therapist, I did not know for my whole life, and then many years even writing my story, that my story is one of narcissistic abuse from my stepfather, and what that did to me, which was create complex trauma. I was living with this unresolved complex trauma and complex PTSD. And so once I started to sort of hone in on, oh my gosh, if I'm a trauma therapist who didn't know that she had trauma, real trauma, quote unquote, because it's relational trauma, it's hidden trauma, it's emotional abuse, it's not bruises, it's not shock trauma like people often think about, natural disasters or car crash or things along those lines. So if I didn't know that I had trauma and yet it was wreaking havoc on my life and I had tried so many things to overcome it for so long, how many people are walking around with unresolved trauma and they don't know it?
Mm-hmm.
So when I was, getting clearer about the book and was thinking about finding an agent and turning to publishing, you hear it's like memoirs are really tough sell stretch. And what's your platform? What's your platform? And I was like, oh, I don't really have a platform. Do I have to go on social media? It was like I did not want to go on social media as a professional. I really thought it was going to be like shouting to the void. But I just so believed in this story, my story, that I was willing to do it. And then I logged on to Instagram as a professional. So I've had a personal account forever, and it's like pictures of my son and my friends, pictures of their kids. And that's, I didn't use Instagram beyond that at all. But when I went on as a professional, I was like, oh, what are other people posting about this stuff? And I did hashtags narcissistic abuse or complex trauma, and I was blown away by the mental health community on social media.
Mm-hmm.
These powerful memes that packed such a punch in this tiny little square, right? It was before there was even as much video content as there is now. It was raw and it was penetrating, and I was just identifying with everything. And so that just lit me up. And I was like, okay, this is exciting. But I was still
Mhm.
terrified to post from such a personal place as a therapist. And it's not just a personal place where I go, yes, I struggled past tense with this thing. It's like, no, I live currently today with complex trauma. And I genuinely, the more I started to post, was like, I'm going to just tank my whatever career I have and have had as a private practice psychologist for all these years. I'm going to have, it's gone, right? Like no one's going to want to come. And and then the reels started, the video content, and I was like, oh gosh, I'm not going to put my face on childhood trauma. Like who would ever want to do that? It just again sounded like the worst idea ever. Um, but one day I was scrolling and I saw someone else's like makeup tutorial, like a proper makeup tutorial,
Mhm.
and then
Mhm.
under that was something on complex trauma. And all of a sudden I went, what if I do a makeup tutorial on complex trauma? And I could see
Mm.
the whole thing in my mind. And I didn't think twice about it. I went to my kitchen table and opened up my computer and brought whatever I had in my bathroom. And I just did this thing about
Did That's your
emotional.
first reel?
It was maybe my second reel because my first one, I didn't ever have my sound on Instagram because why would I? It was all memes. So I kept seeing all these like closed caption posts and I didn't even understand it. So I did one kind of along those lines where I was like, I'm pointing in the air to captions. I'm a psychologist. Like it was just whatever. And
I remember the makeup one.
yes, so that was the thing. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And it made me laugh. I had so much fun doing it. I could feel the truth in it. Like, I mean, I looked like such a mess.
Mm.
And yet it was just so real. And I felt like if up until that point, the writing and claiming my story and finally understanding it had been the most healing and helpful thing I had ever done, because it was about finding a voice, but it was still on these pages in my computer, right? So now
Mhm.
bringing this out into the world with my own face and with my sense of humor, it just felt like this huge extension of saying, I am here, I matter. And it was like a salve. It just was with each thing I posted. I felt like
Mm.
I was reclaiming myself and all the parts of myself, not just the therapist hat, like, oh, it's safe to be a clinician or whatever, that I can just be that part of me. It was all the parts of me, the messy, the silly, the vulnerable, and the part that has some clinical information in there that I could hopefully bring forward in an accessible way, because as you know, trauma is so heavy. It can be so triggering. It can be, I
Right.
can't even read books half the time because I'm like, oh God, one eye open.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Right. No, I totally get it. And that's what I love about your channel. So, you know, um, you have found a way to educate and create laughter at the same time. And I firmly believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I am not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not, I'm just a trauma informed coach. Okay. But, and I'm not going to say just because I got 800 certifications. I don't know. I just like to learn. But the thing is, I believe firmly that we are always in the process of healing and that our healing comes in phases. And I think that is an example right there of what you went through. So here you are, you went through all this education, which probably somewhere in the back of your mind was part of your healing process, right? Just learning all of these things. But then you still didn't recognize your trauma was real. So in the book, and I got some things that I highlighted, but you talked about going to a lecture
Hmm.
And it's I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Vander Kolk. I don't know if I say his name right.
Yeah,
Oh,
Vanderkolk.
okay. So, and you listened to his lecture and it was resonating with you and you were like, this is me.
Yeah.
And you
It's
didn't think your trauma, like you said just now, was real. And so then when you started all this writing, it became another phase of your healing. And then Instagram and Reels has actually served as another phase of your healing. Is that correct?
Yes, completely. And I think it's going to be lifelong. And I don't look at that as a jail sentence. I look at that
No.
as opportunity, as, more trauma responses can be shed. And also, just to speak to your point in another way, we talk about trauma healing as it's not linear. It's not I start here and I go here and I'm done and there's a finish line. Woohoo! It's cyclical. So you kind of come around some of these things that, yeah, maybe I've been here before. It feels familiar, but I've never been there at this age, at this point in my life, with this healing that I've done. It becomes more nuanced. There's a depth there, that does feel new and rich. And quite frankly, that process is in part because if we went from here to here, um, I mean, even as I said, I would be psychotic. I would have a break because it would be too much, too
Mm,
overwhelming.
mm,
And if
mm.
if there's nothing else that we need to know about trauma healing, is that, our trauma responses develop to keep us safe and survive. And so in order to cultivate a new sense of safety and to come out of survival mode, it has to be safe enough to kind of come out and do it differently, to find new ways of coping and staying safe. Um, and so it makes sense that it's a process. It's a process because that's the safest way for it to be sustainable and real. And yeah, so yes, Instagram has been a huge part of my healing. Writing was a huge part of my healing.
So, I mean, I just encourage people to go to your Instagram. Just, it'll be in the show notes. If I don't have it already in the show notes here, it will be in here because when I go and edit, I put all the show notes in here, and that's how it goes out to the podcast.
Mm.
And just go follow her, Ingrid Clayton. If you look her up under that name, you're gonna just find her Instagram. But one of the things I wanted to talk about in that process. So I've always thought about it in phases, like you're saying it's cyclical, but like
Mhm.
you have dealt with complex trauma, which by definition has to do, or is it synonymous with childhood trauma? Is it always childhood trauma?
It's not always childhood trauma, it's often childhood trauma, but it's relational trauma. So it's repeated exposure to traumatic events over time. They don't necessarily have to come from childhood.
Right. Because I was like, I was in an abusive relationship for 18 years. I feel like that's kind of complex, but I didn't know if it was specific because I don't know all the terms. But but in the childhood trauma, especially because for you, this did happen as a child.
Yeah.
And narcissism at that time is really rough, right? And so when you put it all together and we talk about cyclical healing, I've always said this about like my kids when they've come through their traumas, because how I approached it as an adult and what they've had to go through to heal trauma as a child, before they were, but they were teenagers, which is
Mhm.
probably developmentally like, right? But I felt like, okay, well, now I have a husband and I deal with that phase. And then I have kids and I deal with that phase. And each
Mhm.
phase I find um, this healing process like you said, circling back around because how can't it? I had somebody on the show a couple weeks back who, she when she had her daughter and her postpartum depression hit, all of her childhood trauma came back as well.
Wow,
stuff that
yeah.
she wasn't really remembering and relating to. But then it was all of a sudden like, I have this baby girl to take care of and all of this, and I cannot keep her safe in this world. And it was just
Mhm.
everything all at once. But I guess that's what I'm saying. So is there a big, I don't know, what is the difference between healing when this trauma has occurred when you're a child?
I guess I'm not understanding the question. You're saying if you could have started the healing process as a child?
No, for me, I don't feel like I had a problem when I was a child. I think all my trauma came as an adult. What I'm saying is my children had it, you had it as a child. What's the difference when you deal with it as an adult and you have to approach healing, and then approaching it when you have to heal your child as well, your inner
Yeah.
child?
Your inner child. Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest difference is that you sort of pointed to, which is developmentally, we know now that our brains aren't even fully formed. The adolescence goes into mid 20s,
Yeah.
and so you don't have the capacity to even understand or articulate the way that you encode memory, the way that you regulate your nervous system, the way that you process things is very different as a child than you would as an adult. And so, there's a reason that a lot of childhood abuse survivors, they don't even have any memories, in part
Hmm.
because they were dissociated. In order to survive that situation, they had to dissociate and leave their body. And so that can be a very confusing thing to confront, where they're like, but I don't even know what happened.
Hmm.
And so you just truly you don't have the capacity. I mean, I know that I was told and I experienced myself, and most of my trauma was like preteen, teenage years. Um, and I felt that sort of like I'm an old soul and I'm pretty smart and I understand things and I'm intuitive. And so I was very like tracking the environment. I knew things were wrong. I knew they were effed up. I knew my stepdad was an a-hole and all of these things. So I had some sense and awareness, but I'd never been seduced. I didn't know what seduction was. I didn't know what grooming was. My body was like, this is wrong and I am not safe, but I didn't know what was going on. And in the not knowing, coupled with the gaslighting, where the adult, in my case, is saying, this is perfectly harmless. There's nothing wrong with this at all. In fact, I'm glad that you're not bothered by this, right? So being
Hmm.
praised for sort of minimizing and ignoring these signals in my own body. And so all of that just kind of gets interwoven in this way, and it creates this imprint. It's like this imprint, which I never quite knew or understood why I had later all this information. And I knew that I wanted healthy relationships, and I knew I wanted to feel good about myself and stop feeling so ashamed and all of this stuff. And yet I had this lived and learned experience that I was carrying around in my body that said, you're not safe, you're not protected, you're not lovable, something is deeply wrong with you. And I could
Hmm.
not break through that. And I kept repeating that cycle over and over in relationships as an adult, what we call trauma reenactment, which is also very
Hmm.
common with childhood trauma because of this imprint. It's sort of like, even though I knew it was wrong, it was my only normal. My body developed tools and resources in this really alcoholic, narcissistic family system. And so those were my tools. That was my lens for the world. Oh, I know how to deal with this. And so guess what I found? Alcoholic and narcissistic and lying abusive partners that pulled on my strength as a trauma response of, oh, I know how to de-escalate that. Oh, that's
Hmm.
cool. I can
Hmm.
cope with
Hmm.
that.
Right, right.
So it's different, right? It kind of maps into your system in a way that, man, what is trauma and what is me? I was
Right. And
literally developing at that time.
right, and you don't have a language for it, and that's something I studied, like, with Brené Brown, you don't have a language for it, so you don't know. Grooming wasn't a word that was in your vocabulary, and so you
Oh,
didn't look at it and go, oh well, oh okay, I see what you're doing, because you don't have the language for it, right? You're not taught
yeah,
that language in that situation. Obviously you'll never be taught that language in that situation, because
right.
specifically they won't want you to know. But it was something too that you brought up in one of the chapters too, that red flags don't look like red flags when they feel like home.
Yeah. Man, when
And
I
that's
heard
kind
that, I don't even know who said that, but when I heard that for the first time, I was like, there's no greater truth that distills my experience than that line. Yeah.
yeah. And so I do, like, to a level, when I have these shows, I want people to hear that kind of stuff, because I do feel like um education and communication and being open about this with your kids is super important. There's a nonprofit here where I live, and I'm sure they're everywhere, right? But specifically here where I live, the nonprofit that we went to work with, they help you work with law enforcement and everything else. That we went to helped us get the perpetrator arrested and removed from the situation, because for me, and I know this is, well, anyway, we you can get into this as much as you want to. I'll state this. For me, it was my sister's husband, or ex-husband at the time, because they had separated. But for me, it was, he needed to be out of the picture,
Mm-hmm.
because my kids were still teenagers and they couldn't understand that it wasn't their fault. They felt
Yeah.
like they had some kind of control in this situation that they had no control over. And it was not just them needing that space and distance where he had no way of impacting them, but my sister too, and our whole family, who had assimilated this person into our lives for 15 or some odd years. And so oh, bless you.
Thank you.
And so you can expound on that if you want, but I know that for you, having some separation from that
Yeah.
has to be, I don't know, in some level, it helps you have the space to heal, I guess.
Well, two things. One, that you mentioned that, kids and teenagers are still kids. It's also very common with childhood trauma. They will almost always make it their fault because we are hardwired for relationships and to need our elders to keep us safe and protect us in order to survive, right? We literally can't survive as babies in the world unless we're taken care of. And so a child will not make the adult, the caregiver, bad because that threatens their safety. Oh my gosh, if the person who's supposed to be looking out for me
Mm,
isn't safe, it's like devastating. It feels like annihilation. So they will almost always make it their fault. They will ingest the badness into them
mhm,
so that they can feel safe with this external other. It's so heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking. And the thing about, like, obviously, if you're talking about active abuse, yes, separation is crucial. Keeping kids safe in this case, at any cost, obviously, I feel like when we can do that is it's so important, right? Just to prioritize that level of physical safety. But what we know about trauma is that, in fact, even though I moved out of the house at 17 and I had little contact, but I had contact because my mom stayed married to my stepdad until he passed away just over 5 years ago. Um, it didn't matter that he stayed in Colorado and I was in LA and New York and all these places that we talked about. It was as though he was living in my very own cells. And this is not just with complex trauma, but about narcissistic abuse. What happens in that equation, very generally speaking, is that, a narcissist basically doesn't have a true sense of self. I mean, when you think about it, it's like they're almost the shell of a person. And so they can be very drawn to very interesting, smart, creative people,
Mm-hmm.
in part as though they want to kind of go in. I say it's like they devour your goodness, right? And
Mm,
they own it as their own, to be the hero, to be the clever one, to be the
mm,
star of the show. And then they take all of their ick, all of their badness, all of their shame and self-loathing and lying, and they put it into you. They project it all onto you. And so
mm,
as a kid, even though intellectually I was like, he is a liar. He's calling me a liar, but he's a liar. He's gaslighting me. We talked about self-gaslighting, where I internalized that gaslighting to such a degree that I literally could not trust myself. And it's not just that you can't trust yourself with what happened. You can't really trust yourself with anything at all. So for years, even my accomplishments or things, it was like, did that really happen? And am I actually, smart? Like, I couldn't comprehend the goodness with
uh,
anything. And everything wrong was definitely my fault because I'm that messed up. Like, I literally used the word evil. That was what was put into me as a child. So, in this way, what I'm just trying to say, long story longer, trauma lives in the body and it lives in my body. So it didn't
mm.
matter that my body went and lived all the way in the Netherlands, right? It was like a
Right.
part of me was like, how far can I get from my family of origin? I love this idea of a clean slate. Nobody knows me. Fresh start, right? It's going to be brand new. And it wasn't brand new because I brought me with me. And I
Right.
brought this unresolved trauma that kept seeking a do-over, seeking a new happy
Mm,
ending. And in
mm,
order to find that, it had to find fragments that felt familiar. Red flags don't look like red flags when they feel like home. And when I would hook into that familiar feeling, there was a fantasy that was ignited of, but this time it's going to be different. This time they're going to choose me. This time I'm going to be loved. And that's not what happened, right? I repeated this thing over and over and over, and I could not understand why.
yeah. So the two things that I pulled from that, one is wherever you go, there you are, right? You can't escape what's in your bones.
Yeah,
And the second thing is you were looking for what you didn't get as a
yeah,
child,
yeah.
and you kept thinking that the next person who was like that you could pour into would actually take what you poured into them and give you what you needed.
That's
Because
right.
somehow I think, and this might be me misinterpreting, but I think this is what I got from your book too, is that you knew that what you had to give was something worth giving if
Mm,
only someone would appreciate it the way they were supposed to. And they never could, because obviously, you repeat cycles of what you're familiar with. I think you broke
yeah.
that cycle now though, right?
Yes, yes,
Because
yes,
now
yes.
you're in an amazing relationship with a beautiful baby, or I don't know how old he is now.
He's 7 now. Yeah, but no, I'm in
Seven.
the healthiest relationship of my life. It's night and day different from anything I experienced before. Um, yes, thank goodness. Thank goodness. But I lived in that place for so long and it was so painful. And none of my therapists had the language of trauma or trauma reenactment or certainly narcissistic abuse. So when they couldn't see it, when I kept going in and being like, why am I in another relationship? Like same dynamics, different face. Why do I
Right.
only attract and am attracted to unavailable people?
Yeah.
Um, they couldn't give me this framework. And so if I was trying so hard and sitting on therapist couches and going to 12-step programs, and I just did everything I could. I got 3 degrees in psychology. It was like I tried so hard to figure it out. And if no one could really give me the answers, then I must really be broken, Deanna. Like it must
Mm-hmm.
really be me.
Mm.
It confirmed the worst fear, which is that I'm just sicker than most. And the shame of that, the heartbreak of that is just, ugh.
So then, how important would you say that it is for people who are experiencing or have experienced some sort of trauma
Mhm.
to seek a therapist that is versed and informed in trauma, because you went through cycles of not being able to get what you needed.
I mean, listen, in a perfect world, um, every person who wanted treatment would find it from someone who was not even just trauma informed, but trauma trained. Like they have significant training in one, if not several trauma therapies. If I could make that accessible for everyone, that would be my hope. I know that that's not always realistic. So then I say, okay, if you are in therapy or seeking a therapist, at least you as a client can have this language and say, I think I might have complex trauma. Are you familiar with complex trauma?
Mm-hmm.
Are you trauma informed? Do you think you can help me in that way? Um, because I didn't even know that there were different modalities of therapy, different, personality styles of therapists. I mean, all these things that you would specialize. Like I very well could have showed up to therapy with someone who specializes in postpartum depression as someone in my early 20s wasn't going to have a child for 2 more decades. It was just that, but they were a therapist. They hung a shingle. They took my insurance or whatever it was. So I just showed up and I was like, you're the therapist, so you're the expert.
Right.
And that's not always the case. So
Mm.
to just educate ourselves and be informed consumers with therapy or coaching or whatever it is feels so important. And then, I have a lot of other resources on my website. Many are free. I've just started a YouTube channel so that I can do longer form content than what I can just do on Instagram. I list several other people who have books and podcasts and YouTube channels. And it's like, thank goodness for social media in that way. I think the content, like I said, mental health content, listen, there can be a lot bad about social media, but this is one area where I just go, it is life saving and it is free. And I'm just so grateful for that.
Yeah, and I feel like now with the internet and social media, both of those things lend themselves to the ability of the consumer, if that's what you want to call it, the patient, the person
Mm-hmm.
who is seeking the help, to have a little bit more information and to be able to better advocate for themselves. Because the truth is, like, you don't know. I didn't have this language when I started going through all of what I went through or coming out of what I came out of. I didn't
Yeah.
have this language, but I studied it and learned it, and it led me into these different little places that gave me that language. But if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have been able to find it. But I still look to places like that, and that's why I found you on Instagram. I still look to places like that to help encourage me, educate me, go, okay, well, I am on the right track. I'm doing the right thing. I'm just out here trying to help people. And I don't care. I don't care. You don't have to come to me as a coach. I am not a therapist. I am a coach. So if you have to get that disconnection between your past and your present, go to a therapist, because that is outside of my scope. But if you need to learn how to move after you get through that, if you need to learn how to move into how to find your laughter and kind of
Mm-hmm.
plot a course for the future and to remain present, good, I'm your person, right? But but I do think it's all needed and all the information is out there. So I love that, the resources are now being like shared and moved around. But your book for me, was just eye opening in the fact of what it looks like. I would like you to, if you don't mind, explain a little bit, or at least give us a picture, maybe an example of what it means to self gaslight, because I think people know what gaslighting is. And I think oftentimes there are times we don't trust ourselves. But what does that really look like when you say it's self gaslighting?
Yeah. Well, so I think a lot of people think they know what gaslighting means, but I
Okay.
think a lot of people are throwing it around pretty casually.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
don't gaslight me because we have a
Mm-hmm.
difference of opinion, or
Right.
don't gaslight. Like, gaslighting is intentional, emotional manipulation designed to make you question your reality. Okay. And it's intentional manipulation. There is malice there.
Right.
Um, so In my experience of growing up in pervasive chronic gaslighting that kind of permeated throughout the family and into the community, where again, all of my stepdad's wrongdoing were kind of put into me as the scapegoat. I was the liar, the manipulator, too sensitive, made it all up, all of that. In that gaslighting, there was something that landed. It's like he kind of went into my psyche and took a vital piece of me that connected me to myself, where I genuinely thought, well, maybe I was exaggerating. Maybe I didn't, maybe that those weren't his intentions. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Okay, so for years when I was writing the book, that was the working title. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Because I lived in that space for so long, it's what I genuinely believed.
Mm-hmm.
So I hadn't talked with my stepdad about any of these events since the 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still carrying around this narrative that is self gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I exaggerated. Maybe it wasn't that bad.
Was it always applicable to what happened to you in the past and growing up? Or did there, like you said, sometimes in relationships too, that
Yeah.
you would be like, did I really do that? Or question whether you were smart enough, even though you have the degree? Or
I
what
questioned
other areas did it get into?
it got into every area, right? Because then when I would go into relationships as I grew up and became an adult, this same idea of, is it that bad? I would look at, someone who's driving drunk or cheating or lying, and I wouldn't see those as deal breakers. I wouldn't see those as red
Uh-huh.
flags. I would see them as like, well, Deanna, you got everybody. There's always problems in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You always
Mm-hmm.
have to compromise. They're apologizing. They're saying they want to work on it. And so, this ability to minimize deeply disturbing things came with me. And so, all of it was just like, Deanna, I don't want to be selfish, the thing that I was told that I was. So, I was constantly
Mm-hmm.
trying to rise above that. And there's a whole lot more I could say about this in terms of the fawning trauma response, which is basically codependency, where
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
learn to stay safe by figuring out how to avoid or de-escalate conflict by abandoning yourself, right? Because, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm only going to attend to your needs. I'm going to attend to your needs so that hopefully you're okay. And then maybe one day I'm going to be okay too. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep you safe.
Right.
And
You can't rock that boat.
you can't rock that boat. And so that was my biggest tool in the toolbox relationally. I
Mm-hmm.
don't matter. I need to show up for you. And one day, I hope someone is going to see that I'm worthy of being shown up for too. Except I was
Right.
picking people that were incapable of doing it.
Right. Could spot those across the room a mile away, right? So let me ask something. What role did support, like your inner circle, your circle of support, what did that wind up looking like for you and where did that come from?
Yeah, it's a big question and it's looked differently over my life. Even though I came from this dysfunctional family, I've always had at least one person or a few people in my corner. In high school, it was my girlfriends,
Mhm.
my best friend's mom, the counselor in my high school, right? There have
Mm,
always been people that I could tell the truth to the extent that I knew the truth,
right.
that I could share what was going on. Later, the one thing I was never going to become in my childhood was an alcoholic because alcoholism had pained me. I felt like it had robbed me of so much in my childhood. I was like, I'm never going to be that thing. And, lo and behold, it's like practically the second I get out of my house, um, I started hitting the bottle and eventually got sober pretty young. I got sober when I was 21. And that
Which is
community,
amazing because
my
that
yeah,
that's a big accomplishment at that age, to be honest. You had to
it
be
was
still in college, right?
miraculous. Well, I left college and I moved to New
Mhm.
York to go be a rock star because that was going to fix it. I got sober in New York, but that community, they say in 12 step, will love you until you can love yourself. And I really did experience that, you know. Um,
Oh, wow.
and there's always been, right? Even though my therapist may not have been able to put my experience in the lens of trauma or narcissism, I did experience compassion. You know, I did
Hmm.
experience like a real, um,
I'm in your corner kind of thing, even if
yes,
they
the
didn't know all
silence
the
is
language, right?
not. Yes. And so I feel like there's always been people, and thank goodness for that. And at the end of the day, the most healing, helpful thing I ever did was sit at my computer and write my story all by myself at my kitchen table.
Hmm.
And what I actually love about that, what is I think generalizable about that, is not everyone's going to write a book. Please don't think that that's the prescription here, because it's a slog. But it was the first time in my life where I wasn't compulsively pursuing healing. Like, is this thing going to fix me? Is this going to make it better?
Ah.
This
Mhm.
therapy, this relationship? Healing pursued me.
I
Healing
love
got
it.
me out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, Ingrid, you got to go to your computer. You got to write that story. And I'm like, why would I want to write that story? That's like 30 years ago. Get off my back. You got to go and do it. And it was like this calling, this thing that was pulling me into wholeness. It was pulling me into awareness. It was always further along than I was in my own healing. And it was a calling. And so, you know, when you go back to like, well, do we find trauma therapists, or how do we do this work? I say, yes, avail yourself of every resource. And the healing, I believe, wants to happen no matter what. And so
Absolutely.
listen to your callings, listen to those nudges, listen um, to those little truths that are sort of knocking on your shoulder when you're over here busy doing something else, because trauma lives in the body, but so does a deep wisdom that wants wholeness.
Yeah, and I think so, and that's why I say we're all magic, we're all capable of healing. As a matter of fact, we're the only ones who can heal us, really. We
Yeah.
need guidance, and maybe, like you said, like the language and the understanding, but more than that, being able to sit with ourselves. And I think that was one of the things that I really came to terms with, was just being okay with being me wherever I was at that point.
Yeah.
Didn't matter. And a lot of times, I think, first of all, I think everybody has probably experienced some level of trauma at this point, right? Between the pandemic, whatever, we're not going to be perfect raising our kids, there's always, but if you can approach it and you can talk about it, I think in those cases, it's where that is, you can minimize some of it. But the, the being able as an adult to sit with yourself and go, this is actually my belief, not what I was raised, not the culture, not how I was told to be, what I shoulda, woulda, coulda, but just being able to sit with yourself. And I do think writing is good. I mean, I don't know if I'll ever write. I've got like pieces of book written all over the place and never know if I'll ever get that into a place. But it is therapeutic, for not
Yeah.
for a lack of a better word, journaling, whatever, just getting stuff out, um, but finding an outlet, but finding a way to just sit with yourself. And it's difficult. I think a lot of people, I know for me it was difficult to sit with myself at first, not
It's
anymore.
excruciating. I mean, I think there's a reason that like the actual healing was the last house on the block, because everything else I was doing was in an attempt to like outrun it, right? Or
Mm. Okay.
overcome
Yeah.
it, override it. It was like I didn't want to go in. I didn't want to feel it. I didn't want to own it. I was doing everything to
Hmm.
get the heck out. And so, you know, that's also why I think Instagram became this sort of surprising, so surprising way of going, I'm going in. I'm owning who I actually am, what I actually feel, what I'm experiencing. I'm not trying to prove that I'm better now. I got all the answers. It's like, no, I'm a person. I'm a real whole person. This is my journey. What's your journey like? And it takes the shame out of it.
Yeah, and what I love about something you said about your Instagram was that you thought, okay, it doesn't matter. I'm putting everything out there. All of me is going on there, and I don't care if it ruins my whole career that you thought maybe it would even.
Yep.
You
Yep.
said, I'm doing it anyway because this is what I need to do. I'm
Right.
done. I'm done. I'm just putting it all out there. And I think at a point where you said you weren't really sure you were actually through that phase of your healing, through that cycle. And yet
I mean,
Instagram
yeah,
became
it
part
was
of that
a huge
phase.
risk. And I think healing often feels like a risk. But I'm going to lose these relationships, or I'm going to lose this thing. I genuinely thought I was going to lose my career. I did lose a very significant relationship, the relationship with my mother. There was a lot that I had to face
Mm,
losing and that I did genuinely lose. But what I came to, what I firmly believe, is nothing is worth abandoning myself over. And I mean nothing. So
mm,
if it meant that I had to lose my career, if it was like, oh God, you can't really be a therapist anymore, I trusted that finding myself, my authentic self, my true
hmm.
self was not only worth it, but that, okay, I guess I'm not meant to be a therapist anymore. Because if I lose something by finding me, it is not meant for me right now.
Oh, amen. I love that. I love that. All right. So is it okay if I play one of your Instagram reels?
Oh, sure. Gosh. Okay.
All right. Let's see. Let me get the volume going because I want to be able to. And I'm going to see if I can't get it in the camera because, oh, Fireside is so much fun. All right. Oh, hang on. I don't know if it's muted.
Can't believe I did
I love
this!
this.
I can't believe I did this! I can't believe I did this. I can't believe I did this!
So I just want people to understand that this is it's so there's no way that not everybody relates. I don't understand. If you get hate emails, then there is no hope in the world. Just saying. Because it's so it's just so relatable. You just pick these little snippets of whatever and you are 100% like I go this is my process. I go through sounds on Instagram and I'm like, all right, I love that sound and I can't look at any videos because if I look at anybody else's videos, I start thinking, "Oh, how can I do that?" Or you know what I mean? Like I got to pick a sound and be like and just
Yes.
do because otherwise I get sidetracked by other people's ideas. But your stuff is just so I don't know. It's so much fun. It's so much fun. It is definitely laughter.
It is so
Which
much fun to do, and so, it's not all funny. Some of them are more serious, but I felt like if I was having fun doing it and if I made myself laugh, I almost didn't care how it was received because it was
Mhm.
helpful to me.
Like
Like
Understood
oh
the
oh oh I'm
assignment.
sorry.
Did
Shh.
the
Hold
assigner of the
on.
assignment?
Okay,
that's
sorry.
what it is.
I didn't realize the volume was still going on this thing.
Yeah, just so the compass was about authenticity and my own personal healing. That's how I had to approach it. And honestly, that it has touched so many people has been a total shock and surprise and
Well,
delightful and wonderful. But that wasn't, I never really imagined that happening.
Right. And the thing is, that tells you if you're on the right track, right? If
Mm,
you start doing this and you going, okay, I'm going to just do this, be me, and I'm going to have a platform so that we can also come to this when the book is ready and all of this stuff. But then you start doing you and you start being you and you serve up a message that people need to hear.
mm.
That's it. If it, if they it, that's why people are attracted to it, because they needed to hear it. And which also says that you're in the exact right place. I mean, whether you kept your practice or not, right? Like, you are in the exact right place. I
Yes.
mean, honestly, I'm sure it didn't cost you a practice. Although I get that it cost you relationships. That's unfortunate, really. But you
Yeah,
have a brother too, don't you?
I do. Yeah. We're not very close, but we never really have been.
Yeah.
But he, supports me and the writing, and all of my step siblings, my stepdad's kids all supported me in
Oh,
this
okay.
writing, and I largely got just so much support from people.
Good.
But not everyone's going to champion your efforts to heal. People may not want to face their own stuff, and honestly, fine, don't do it, but I'm not going to let it get in the way of me living my life in as free a way as I possibly can. And I'm not healing at anyone, right? It's not like,
Right.
take it. It's like, I'm inviting you in. I'm inviting you on this journey. I
Mm-hmm.
hope you'll come with
Mm-hmm.
me. If you don't, I understand, but I'm not going to let that stand in the way anymore.
Yeah, I love it. Well, listen, we have a few people here in the audience: Brian, Rachel, Peter. If you guys have any questions, you guys come on up. You guys listening on the web, I appreciate you out there. Join the Fireside app so that you guys can listen and be part of the show. So, and we are streaming on YouTube if you're listening out there too. I appreciate it. I don't pay attention to my YouTube live. So if you're commenting, well, I'm not seeing it. Hi, Brian. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you, ladies?
We're good. Do you have a question, Brian, or a comment, something to add?
Yeah, I loved and enjoyed listening to you guys, and and in listening to everything you had to say about the trauma and uh, narcissistic abuse, and you know, all my love to you, Ingrid. Even though I'm just meeting you now. Um, and of course to you, Deanna, and everyone listening. Um, and yeah, I don't know so much about the abuse part, but I do understand about trauma in different ways from my own life.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, so I send all my love from this man with autism to each of you listening.
Thank you, Brian. And I always appreciate when you come up and express your appreciation on the show. I know you've had your fair share of things that go on, and then I feel like you are such a trooper, and that you have a show on here, you stick with it, and you encourage a lot of people who have maybe some learning disabilities or whatever things might get in their way. You teach people that you can power through that, overcome that, and do just what you're doing, exactly whatever it is you want to do. So I applaud you as well. Thank you, Brian, for always coming up here and sharing a little bit with us. Okay, so I don't know if there's anybody else who wants to come up. In the meantime, if you do, just hit the plus sign and I will have you come up and ask your question or share or whatever. But in the meantime, there's one last thing that I do like to close out with, and that is that I would love to hear from you. What are the 2 to 3 takeaways that you would like to live on in time perpetual somewhere on the web, wherever this is going to live forever and ever? Just 2 or 3 things that you would like us to take away from this discussion today.
Well, the thing that always comes to mind when I'm asked this question is to let people know you're not broken. It's a common feeling for trauma survivors. It's a common belief. And the reality is that our bodies were designed for survival, and that they went into survival mode doing exactly what they were meant to do, and that there's a brilliance in that. And it is unfortunate that sometimes we get stuck in that fixed survival mode, like chronic trauma response that can make us feel broken. But there is freedom, there is flexibility, there is a way to gain access, maybe even for the first time, to a fuller self that's not so kind of taken over and consumed with all of these trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So you are not broken,
Mhm.
is the biggest one.
I
Yeah.
love that. I say that all the time too. You can feel like you've been cracked, fissures, fractured, splayed, but you're not broken because you have all of what you need inside of you to heal.
That's right.
So, and when you do, just like I feel like just like a bone that breaks has those tendons, those ligaments tighten up around it, and it just really just kind of cocoons it and pulls it in. And then the healing process to mend itself really turns out to be stronger
Mhm.
than it was before.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of what it's like when we heal from these wounds, that we wind up being able to have more empathy, to have more compassion, to be stronger in the sense of never compromising yourself
Yeah. Yeah.
again, which makes for the strongest people. It also makes for the biggest ripple effect in healing the rest of the people around you.
That's lovely.
And
Yeah.
and I do feel like that if we take care of us and we make ourselves the best versions, it ripples out and it impacts. And if we all just start with that,
Hmm.
you level up. Everything levels up. So
Yeah.
so that's kind of what, and that's why I like when I said I read your book, I felt like that's one of the things. It just poured into me. It helped me. It made me see things that I kind of really, you don't think about. And the red flag comment, you have a reel on it. I think you have a
I'm
reel
sure
on
I
that.
have several. Yeah.
On the red flags, like, oh yeah, yeah, that looks great. you
Exactly.
know anyway, so it is, it's comical. So I hope you guys enjoy the show. I hope you guys go visit Dr. Ingrid Clayton's trauma toolbox, a freebie in here. Go visit her website, go visit the Instagram. There's lots and lots of stuff out there. Okay, to wrap up, I like to say I see you and you are beautiful. I truly believe that. I appreciate you so much for coming up on the show today and sharing an hour of your time with us. So thanks.
Thank you
Welcome
so much
back
for
anytime.
having me.
If you go, oh my God, I got this thing I want to talk about, let me
Oh,
know. You're always
thank
welcome.
you, Deanna. I so appreciate it.
All right, I am going to sign us off and play some music to get us out of here, pull you down and let people know about what's going on next week. And then we'll slowly drift on out with the music.
Okay.
Thanks again.
Bye, all.
Um, so you guys, next week, I just want to let you guys know that I have another guest coming on. Her name is Rachel. She'll be with us next week, and we will again be exploring the same topic. What I like to get into every single week, and that is just sharing with you a community that brings hope and healing and letting you know that there is laughter after. So, until I see you next week, love each other, stay connected, and shine on.